into the InnerVerse. It's an illusion.
Welcome to the One Within All, to another episode of the InnerVerse podcast. It is a beautiful day in November, and once again, going to be asking the biggest, most important, best questions that we can ponder in this island Earth. We are questioning, who are we? How did we get here? Where do we go when we die? What is the nature of the afterlife? And most importantly, what do we make of all of these scriptural ideas and the many different interpretations that are offered in context with the dogma that seems to be so solidified in our friends and family about things along the lines of hell, the afterlife, the devil, original sin? There's so much to consider with all that. And what really helps when we get into this type of conversation is to have an insider or two. And by insider, I mean, you could say outsider on the other side of the veil. Friends, family, people that we can communicate across the spiritual dimensions. And lucky for us, our guest today, Brandy Anderson, has had some very fascinating encounters with the afterlife and family members on the other side that have helped her flip her couch around in terms of what she thinks is going on in the meaning and nature of life itself. And in her book, Through the Veil, A Glimpse Into the Afterlife, Brandy takes the information that she gleaned from conversations with the spiritual world and has painted a very different picture of interpretation of the traditional Christian dogma and doctrines, stuff that is so much more aligned with life itself and life affirming. And really, how would you call it? Biophilic, instead of this necrophilic, death fearing, death hating, life hating type of society that we've built out of shunting the shadow out of our sight and trying to hide from it all the time. And in that, Brandy's also a Jungian coach. So she's got quite a range of knowledge, including depth psychology, one of the things that I'm most excited to talk about at any time, any place. I really particularly enjoy the idea of escapist theology that she describes in the book, that in her words, escapist theology, the idea that we're just here to get out of here, it paints a distorted picture of the world as a sinking ship that we must evacuate. But this worldview only contributes to spiritual whiplash. Bam. Couldn't have put it better myself. I think there's a lot of people with aching necks, just craning, looking up instead of being here now and realizing that heaven on earth is a place that we never left. So I'm really excited to talk about all these things with Brandy, and especially to find out more about the paranormal side of her experiences. You can find her at brandyanderson.net. You can get her book on Amazon, or you can find links to her book on that website. She's also got this Jungian coaching that she does, which I'm excited to learn more about. So let's not waste any more time. We'll get right into it with the religious dogma reviser, archetypal advisor, and ambassador to the afterlife, Brandy Anderson. Welcome to InnerVerse, and thanks for being here.
Hi, Chance. Thank you for having me on your show. It's an honor to be here.
I appreciate you a lot because, people are aware I just had a baby, and me and you had to reschedule this about 4 times, and your patience is clearly an indicator of your virtue. And I'm excited to know more about you and your story. What would you like to say in the introduction to yourself and to the things that we're going to unpack today?
Yeah, I just as you already said, I'm a Jungian coach and a spiritual director. So my journey has been informed by the work of Carl Jung heavily informed by his work. And so everything, I kind of filter everything through that lens. And it's been really helpful in my own journey, because I believe that my first work is myself, obviously. And so as I do my own inner work, I'm able to come alongside others in a way that that might help them to also come into their integrity or their alignment and wholeness. And so that really is what it's all about. We can only lead people as far as we've gone ourselves. And so it's about doing the hard work, the shadow work. And then just being a light in the world to help others as they navigate their own journeys.
Beautiful. Yes. All of that. You know, in my own practice with biofield tuning, it's super important to me that I hopefully am helping people comprehend that what we do, even in things that we call healing arts, it's not to fix our brokenness. It's an expression of our wholeness. And I want to make everything that I do and everything that I present something that points to that intrinsic wholeness that we never left. You know, we may be just one unit in a indefinite amount of units in the world, but that one unit is itself a unity, and it's quite a beautiful thing. So Brandy, let's talk about your background, because you have really come a long way. It sounds like the family that you were raised in, not all that different, but maybe a little more extreme than myself, being raised Christian, and some of the sort of scary boogeyman stuff that gets proffered in those religions, I think maybe as a hook to keep people reeled into it, which, you know, the real truth and the real spirituality doesn't need any kind of bait. Right? Like it's self-fulfilling enough. But yeah, let's get into your background.
So I come from a Christian background, but I have to admit, I was raised in church. As a child, I was plugged into the church with my family. But throughout most of my teen years, we weren't really active in church. And so I spent the majority of my late teen years and from there on into adulthood as someone who would have identified as a Christian, but I wasn't practicing any form of religion. I wasn't plugged into any churches. And in all actuality, I wasn't a Christian because I was not following Christ. But, I would have articulated it that way just simply based on the faith of my family. But in 2014, I entered into like a season of depression that catapulted me into a spiritual awakening. Would you like for me to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and you can be as at length as feels right. We don't have to be. We have plenty of time here, So
okay.
Just feel free to stretch out your answers and go into tangents. And we're having a good time here. I'm going to try not to talk too much, but I am fired up.
All right, cool. Yeah. So, well, in 2014, I found myself in a deep pit of despair, just heaviness, just depression descended upon me. And I'm not given to clinical depression. Like in all of my life, I had never struggled with depression issues or mental health issues. So when it first began, I was thinking this will lift. In time, this will subside because, everything is cyclical. We go through seasons of, where highs and lows, and so depression was one of those things that I've never been clinically depressed. So, I just intuited that it would shift. But it did not shift. It just persisted. And I know now, looking back in retrospect, that it was very much a philosophical angst, like a philosophical depression, existential angst. So I just, every day I would just push through and wait for it to lift. And when it didn't, one morning I woke up and it was just, the heaviness was so palpable. I thought, I just can't take this anymore. And so I cried out to God. I began to pray, but it wasn't a pious prayer by any stretch of the imagination. It was more of a provocative prayer. It was more of a if you are there kind of prayer, where I just unleashed all of my frustrations out into the atmosphere. And I was just hoping something might shift. I just wanted some relief. And in the midst of that, like I was just, expressing my frustrations, venting my anger, that kind of thing. And in the midst of all of that emotional swirl, that chaos inside that I felt, I heard a voice as loud and clear as anything I have ever heard before in my life. And it just said, be still. And instant peace washed over me. And I knew immediately that I thought to myself, this is God, but I didn't have a context for what had happened to me. I didn't have a foundation that I could sort of make sense of my experience in that moment. And so as I sat with that peace, I just thought, whatever this is, and I believed that it was divine. I believed that it was God. But I just knew that I wanted more of that peace. I was like, this is it. That's the answer to every question, really, it's indescribable peace. And so I began to plug into some churches because in my way of thinking, I was like, well, that was God. I need to make sense of what has happened to me. So my only context was the Christian church because that's, my whole family, they're plugged into Christian church. So I just began to plug into some churches, just studying the Bible, just really drilling down into different theologies, different philosophical ways of framing reality. And after years of just really digging in that regard, I came to the end of all of that. And I felt as though mainstream Christian answers to life's most important questions were just less than satisfying. So in that space, I sort of shifted into more of a contemplative Christianity. It's more of an experiential Christianity versus, conceptual. And that I found to be very refreshing and life-giving. And in that space, it's just more of a mystical Christianity. And I also began to study more Eastern traditions, Buddhism, and even some of the Hindu scriptures. And I began to just have a more holistic view of reality from that perspective. And so in the midst of all of that, as I'm in this very contemplative space, and I'm just enjoying this more resting in the mystery, I guess you could say. My grandmother came to the end of her life, and after her crossing, I had a paranormal encounter that served to bring all of that theological, philosophical wrestling into sharp focus with existential clarity. I should back up and say maybe that when we are nearing the end of our physical lives, the veil between the spiritual and the physical becomes thin. And at the moment of our passing, the veil opens entirely, creating what's called a portal. And we usually slip through instantaneously. It's usually just a really, really quick phenomenon. But in my grandmother's instance, she had an aversion to death. She didn't want to die. She was afraid of it. Though she was raised in a Christian context also, and her entire adult life, she was plugged into the church, went to Bible study, read her Bible, all of the things. At the end of her life, she was afraid to die. And because she was so afraid, she resisted crossing in a way that created a situation where she became stuck between the physical and the spiritual, and her portal remained open. And then pretty quickly, she gained some perspective about her situation, and she was able to cross. She was no longer stuck, but that portal was still open. And that portal allowed her to have access to the physical realm and to manipulate the physical realm in ways that she would not have been able to without it. And so from there, the things after communicating with her, that sort of helped to bring everything into sharp focus for me, connect a lot of theological dots. And that was the basis for writing the book, like what happens when we die and how that should impact the way that we live life now. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from. And before my grandmother ever came through, before she died, I was already on a deeply spiritual journey. And I had already went to school for spiritual direction and Jungian coaching. And I was always already very plugged into to that life path. And so her crossing just served to, I don't know, I've said it that way a couple of times, but that really is the best way to articulate it. It just really brought things into sharp focus. And though she didn't stay or communicate for that reason, she had personal, family, relational type reasons for wanting to stay and communicate and reach out from the other side. It was a tremendous gift to me because it helped me. It allowed me to be able to sort of get some perspective about some things that I had been sort of wrestling with and circling around. And so it was just really helpful.
Yeah, I definitely want to know more about that. Especially interesting that you kind of get some of the mechanics described to you of how things work. I've encountered an open portal or two in my life, including a story I've told before on the show, so I won't share it here, but I was once inadvertently included in a seance and wound up becoming the medium. And
Oh, wow.
and got veridical information about someone's deceased relative and everything. So at that point, I knew that there's definitely a there. Although I had belief, but I had knowledge, but I didn't have understanding. What I like about your path is that you started with understanding and then you sought out knowledge, because knowledge is something that we can share from person to person and transfer it, but we can't transfer understanding. But once you have understanding that can be, that's yours, you can transfer that or apply it to other areas of knowledge, so that when you're going through the studies you're doing, you always have this ability to cross-reference it and check it against, like, yeah, but what about what I understood in my encounter with the divine? And that is basically your truth radar about whether or not somebody's interpretation actually holds water, right? And that's beautiful. I think that that's a great place to start. And so many people probably go into this. I don't want to just paint all religion with the negative brush, but it's kind of like a fly trap in a way, because people are in a sort of need and they want answers, but maybe they don't start with understanding. They just go there first, even in the low point. And there can be good things. I mean, my mom, her favorite Bible verse is all the times where God says, be still, right? Be still. She's saying that all the time. That's her jam. And I know that it's made, she just texted me right the moment that I said her name. Mom, great. I hope she listens to this one. But, she's probably transformed her life with religion in positive ways, but it's through the understanding that she gained on her own, similar to yourself, maybe without the paranormal, spooky stuff. So why I'm bringing this up is that your book is incredible at actually transferring knowledge, right? About and a good articulation of the interpretations that will fit and vibe with somebody's understanding if they can grasp it, and will point them to what it should feel like. It's almost like gives them the framework to imagine what it feels like to be in the state of understanding. I think it's really well written, and whoever edited it, if you had an editor, they did a great job. It's just above a lot of people's first effort in writing, and I appreciate that. It was an enjoyable read. So with all of that, let's talk more about, tell us more about your encounter with your grandma across the veil and how that worked. I would love to know your family's reaction and sort of the ins and outs of that, because it's a good story.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing that up. The difference between knowledge and wisdom, really, or understanding. And so there is a difference between cognitive knowledge and an actual lived experiential knowledge, your lived experience. You can say you believe all sorts of things, but how you live your life, your lived experience, that's what you actually believe. And that's what actually creates your outer reality. So it's important to distinguish between those two things. And much of the church is just cognitive knowledge and not a lot of understanding or experiential knowledge. But more about my grandmother and how she came through. So coming from a Christian perspective and family, we were not plugged into the paranormal world at all. Like, we weren't people who attempted to reach spirits. We didn't participate in any activities of trying to reach people who had already crossed or anything like that. So, in fact, I would venture to say that myself included would have been afraid to do so. We would have been afraid of the repercussions of such activity. But after my grandmother crossed, it was a couple months after she passed. The first way that she communicated, she turned the television on, and it's a Roku smart TV, and she navigated to the search and she typed the word hello. And my family, who lives in the house, they ran out screaming in fright. They were completely horrified. And they called me immediately. I was shopping in Costco, and they called me in tears. They had it on speaker, and they were all speaking at once, and everyone was, just completely frantic about what had happened. And in my logical, rational kind of mind, I was thinking, this is probably a hacker. Somebody's playing a prank, just getting them worked up. that, there has to be like a logical, natural explanation for what had just happened. So I told them just to check the parameter, check the cameras, make sure nothing was hooked to the television or anything like that would, like Alexa or something like that someone could hack and use to maybe communicate. So they did all of those things. And in addition to those things, they also prayed and saged and cleansed their house in case it was something spiritual and unwanted. And so a couple of days went by and no more activity. And then, I don't know, 2 or 3 days later, my grandmother, again, she turned the television on, navigated to the search bar. And this time the word love appeared in the search. But my family, they were not at all having it. They were completely horrified. So again, they ran out screaming in fright. And my aunt, finally, she moved out. She was so afraid of the activity because this would just persist. The TV would come on, words would appear in the search bar. My family would get beside themselves with fright, and then the TV would shut off. And finally, I said, well, this is not stopping. It persists. So we need to get to the bottom of it. We need to address this and figure out what is happening. What's going on here? And I came over, and while I was visiting, and I didn't even attempt, like I didn't try to conjure anyone or call out to whoever was doing this. I just came over for a visit, and I was in the living room. My mom was with me, and we were just hanging out, talking, and we were discussing the whole TV phenomena, all of the things that had been happening. And all at once, the television popped on by itself, navigated to the search. I think hello might have been the first thing she said to us, maybe love. So anyway, calmly, we engaged with whoever it was to try to get to the bottom of it. And in my mind, I really felt like there was a natural cause for this. It probably was a hacker. So I just started asking questions, trying to pay attention to what the responses were, trying to, be aware of the surroundings in case anything would be a clue. And, I didn't know. I had no idea what was happening. But it became quickly apparent that it could not be someone in the physical realm at all, because whoever it was could read our thoughts in real time. So like we would be thinking a question or have thoughts in our mind about what we wanted to ask or say next. And the response would be issued before we could even articulate what we were thinking. And so we were all just kind of rocked by that. And so finally I was like, are you reading our thoughts? And she said, yes. So then we started to test it. We would intentionally think something, and boom, she would issue the response just right, on the money every time. And so then we were really concerned, it wasn't a hacker. It wasn't someone in the physical realm. It was definitely spiritual, but was it malevolent or was it really Granny? So we continued to engage with her, but tentatively. We had our reservations. We were trying to use discernment, trying to determine if it was indeed Granny. And in the course of time, we did determine that it was indeed her because of her great love and devotion to particular family members and her concern for relational issues. She could see patterns, because I should say that when we cross, when we are in spirit, when we're on the other side, we can see from a vantage point that we can't see from in the physical. On the other side, they see with clarity into the heart of people and situations, like nothing is hidden. They can see people's motives, their true desires. All of it is just laid bare. If they want to see, they can peer right into all of that. And so she was able to see family members and the way that they were struggling, certain destructive patterns in people's lives, mental health issues that were really, affecting certain family members. And because of her love and devotion, she really spoke into those issues in a way that brought a lot of healing and restoration and saved some lives, even in some cases. And she also apologized for some past hurts, things that she felt she needed to say to particular family members. And it was deeply healing and very comforting. So the whole process of it was just centered around love and healing and wholeness. And so nothing about it was frightening or anything like that. So as we did engage and as we began to see that all of the communication was just laced with love, we knew that it wasn't anything malevolent. And we've had sustained communication with my grandmother now for about 3 years. And the fruit of it has been nothing but good.
So it's still going on. I was going to ask how long this went on for.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So it's like kind of just an open channel. That is incredible. And so there's not just you that can do this, but other family members kind of have access to her at will.
Yeah.
How complex did the responses get?
Well, at first they were very simple. Like the first, like I said, it was just the one word hello, and then the one word love. And as we were engaging with her, on the first occasion that we began to talk to her and not run out screaming, it would be a word here and a word there, maybe a couple words at a time, but it was very simple, basic communication. And then a couple times she typed the word help. And we were like, oh, gosh, it kind of worried us. What do you need help with? Do you need help crossing? And it was a quick no. And I'm like, well, gosh, and then I thought, well, maybe she's telling us that she's trying to help us. And I was thinking, are we in danger? Do we need help? What? But ultimately, what we came to see is that it requires energy for them to be able to manipulate the physical realm in any capacity. So for her to type on the television and communicate with us, it took energy. And she was low on energy. So that's why it was just the one word here, one word there, help. She was saying help because she wanted us to help her have energy so that she could say more. But we didn't understand and she didn't know how to tell us. Also, none of us knew how to help her with energy. I don't think she even knew what we could do to help her with energy at that time. As it turns out, fire is very helpful to give them energy. And so now she was finally able to tell us that. And so we build fires when she needs help with energy. But in the course of time, as she gained more energy, she was able to say more. And on the television, it's usually just, maybe a sentence because as she's typing, she might have to erase some words and then start over because the search bar is only so long, right? But if she uses the printer, which she can use any electronic device, she can print full-on sentences, paragraphs even. So like she's printed like full letters or the equivalent of,
So this is the age of HD recording and cameras and stuff. Did you guys capture any of this?
Yeah, we have. We did video in the beginning because we were trying to just document and figure out what was going on. So we would set up our phones and just video the television as we communicated. Excuse me, I'm sorry. But ultimately it doesn't look like, it just looks like words appearing in the search bar. And so it's not like proof that it's coming from the other side. Because you could do it with an app on your phone. You could manipulate the television type words. One thing that I began to notice when she was communicating, she could type capital letters and also use like symbols like colons, parentheses to make like a smiley face, that kind of thing. And that's not possible from the remote on the television. You can't make capital letters with your remote control when you're typing in the search, on the Roku television. But I did, just out of curiosity, I did download the app to see, and you can do it with an app. So even that is not conclusive evidence that it's coming from the other side.
There's something about these kind of phenomenon that I don't know why, but there's always this room left for reasonable doubt that it's trickery.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not by no means accusing you of trickery, but as somebody that has studied extensively the paranormal, there's just almost never a case where it's foolproof, perfect evidence that there's nothing possibly going on below the surface. So that's just part of the deal. I don't know why that is. It's like we just have to, it has to do with, I don't know, maybe operating in the realm of the unknown, and for it to function, it has to operate that way. But I'm very fascinated by the question of spirits needing energy sources to interact with the physical world. In my biofield tuning, I do these sessions remotely. And while I don't try to call on specific spirits for assistance, I will invoke like guides and all that of the person I'm working with and of myself. And I always have candles on the table in front of me. I always had this intuition that the living flame would be itself a type of portal and energy source to connect our energy fields from across the distance and maybe even for other purposes that I don't know. So I've just always felt like I needed those fires there. And there have been times, rarely, because I don't go out of my way, but there have been times where there's interaction with a disincarnate or deceased person, which is like, I actually prefer not to deal with that because it becomes a lot more murky. But sometimes a tuning session requires that, or there's even what I perceive to be an attachment of a deceased loved one or relative that is doing some kind of damage or harm in their attachment. So there's so many questions once we start talking about this afterlife and spirit stuff. So I don't really know what the best order is, but let's just talk about that. Did you learn anything in regards to spirits that are not crossed over, or that kind of have a maybe unintentional, but not malevolent, that means bad intent, but a negative influence on people that they're with?
Yeah. Basically, when we cross over into the astral realm, which is just the plane of existence that is closest to this earthly existence. And there, you hear in spiritual circles, people talk about earthbound spirits that are stuck. And some people they're kind of lost. They don't, they're a little maybe confused about their situation. It's entirely possible for a person to cross and not know that they are dead if they have a sudden like an accident, or they're suddenly murdered and they weren't expecting it. And so those people can have a sense of unrest. They're not at peace within. And so they could maybe have a little bit of a negative influence as far as if they were, around, their energy is lower. You could say their vibration is a little lower. And then, of course, just like here in the physical realm, there's both good and bad. I mean, this world of duality, we have people with all sorts of intentions, from well-meaning to malevolent intentions. And same thing is true on the other side. When since the astral realm is where all people pass through when they first cross, you have a mixed bag. And so, in some of these places that are actually haunted, where you have the poltergeist activity, like where people would go and investigate that kind of thing. My grandmother has indicated that those are just open portals, and that they are, bad energy. The people or the spirits that are accessing those portals, moving in and out, they're bad intention, they're bad energy. And she would say that, she would tell me to stay away from those places, but she, for instance, wouldn't be able to go to those places because it would be dangerous for her even. And it's hard for her to even see in those places because she says they are dark. So there is very much a difference between whatever vibration you're at within the spirit realm, just the same as it is in the physical realm, though often we're not aware of it because we're blinded by this world of duality. The world of form has us locked in this illusion, and we don't see all of that. And like you were saying earlier about there not being clear evidence for our rational brains, there's the mystery. There's no way to conclusively ever prove the metaphysical. And I think that the reason for it is because of the ego. It's the conditioned mind, this world of form. It's that way for a reason. My grandmother says the ego can't understand the metaphysical. And so unless we are able to transcend our rational conditioned minds and learn to tap into the more intuitive things, we wouldn't even be open to that kind of thing. But there's all sorts of energy here in this physical world. So that doesn't cease to be true on the other side.
There's a particular client experience that I want to share because it was so profound, where basically in the energy field of this British woman, we found a time where she'd had a traumatic experience of somebody passing away. And as we investigated it further, I was getting this strong ping of there's somebody here. So I started interrogating it internally, and I'm like, okay, this is somebody that was close to you, maybe a boyfriend, had an alcohol problem, died from that, or possibly suicide. And all of that ended up being true. And and so I was getting the sense that this deceased person was attached to her. And as we pulled on that thread further, she had this memory emerge of after the person had died, that she had called out to them and said, "You can stay with me forever." You can be with me forever. So she gave consent to that. And then there's this attachment. So we removed this attachment. There was a great like catharsis over that. And she came back for another session to work on something else, maybe a year later. And she told me, you know, in our first session, I never actually admitted to this because I was embarrassed about it, but I had a drinking problem for like my whole adult life. And I was kind of a low key functional alcoholic. And after that session where we removed that ex-boyfriend, I just didn't drink anymore at all. It just left me. And that was like the whole vibe of the information I was getting was like, this spirit wants to drink. So yeah, these things can have an influence on us, but it's also kind of tricky to deal with because in the wrong context. And I've had this happen one time. And then ever since I've been really cautious about it. You remove a spirit like this and the person just finds something else to blame. And then like, you know, because addiction is very much rooted in blaming. You can't really do it without the other. So in this case, the one I'm talking about, she wasn't in a state of blame. She just, you know, moved on from her problem and it was all fine. Other times I've worked with people who've had addiction patterns and then there's a spirit attachment and then they just, you know, first they get upset and blame that attachment for having ruined their life. And then when they spiral out of control because of the blame energy, then they might blame me, you know, for like opening the door to making them worse or something. But anyway, you got to be careful with that stuff. That's why I try to not go out of my way to deal with it because it's so much unknown. Yeah. That and then that resonates because my grandmother talks about that also, that most things have a spiritual component. You know, the addictions, the things that we struggle with in life. And, you know, and when I say spiritual component, actual spirits, actual entities, some human, but some not. And some are malevolent. And so, and I asked one time, I was like, what is like what's the fastest way to catch a demon? You know, like what is the best way to attract like negative entities? And she said, she said anger, alcohol, and drug use. So, or, you know, like if you were to abuse alcohol or abuse drugs and anger, and it's because it solidifies the ego. It strengthens the ego. And so, and that's where evil originates, from the egoic compulsions, the constructs, the egoic constructs. And so, and also I would say, I like to say we have a team of light around us, which, you know, in Hebrews, it's called the great cloud of witnesses urging us on. And, you know, and it's comforting to know that like my grandmother is with me and I have other family members, what I call it, a team of light, even my pets around me all of the time is deeply comforting. I talk to them, I acknowledge them in my life because I know that they're there and that they're helping to try to guide me into my highest life path. I mean, that's what they intend. But it must be said, though, that we could have not a team of light, but a team of dark if we are bad energy people. So like if I was into a lot of like low energy, bad energy things, it would mean that my grandmother really couldn't be with me anymore. And, you know, that's kind of, it's one of those things where if you do have an addiction issue and you are, you know, generating negative energy, you're going to repel the higher vibration spirits that you would hope to be surrounding you. So yeah, that makes total sense that, you know, like if you have an issue with alcohol there, you're going to attract spirits that want you to drink. And so there'll be this like perpetual cycle of, you know, feeding the demons, so to speak. And that's even a thing in Buddhism, the feeding the demons. It's, of course, it's not actual entities that they're speaking of, but, you know, it's about integrating and bringing into the light all of these different parts of ourselves. Yeah, that's super interesting. You know, that's fascinating that you would say the ego has to do with this, like, feeding of addictions and things of that nature. I definitely agree with the thesis that drug alcohol use can generate or attract these attachments. In my perspective, I think it may just be kind of like an intellectual perspective, maybe not literal, especially when we talk about anything spiritual. We're really talking about the mental plane. So it's quite malleable how we might interpret it. But I see it as like heavy use of substances opens up holes in your aura, which is why when people do like ayahuasca ceremonies, if it's going to go well, they need like the shamans there to hold space and to create literally like a frequency shield of harmonics, with the Icaros and the songs they sing. It like blankets or makes like a bubble of positive energy or light, because sound is light. Sound is just a different part of the spectrum of light. So that's interesting. And I also really like this idea of the great cloud of witnesses, because one of the things that was transformative for me in terms of like getting over some of my problematic behavior when I was younger was this concept that you're never actually alone. Like, you could apply that to the fact that no matter what, you're there, you saw it, yourself is there, but also there's this great cloud of witnesses, or your team of light, or the team of dark, depending on, maybe kind of a blend of the two for most people. And in terms of being in integrity, when you realize that you're never alone, you can't get away with anything. The world, this is, in my opinion, why the world responds to your virtue and integrity, even if you aren't, air quotes, seen doing the immoral act or the destructive act or the wrong. It's still seen. Witness is the foundational component of the entire universe or consciousness. So at the very least you saw it, but I think maybe some people that just kind of get in the rut, they never lift up out of the rut enough to realize this, but there's like a direct correspondence to your own success in the world or your own failure in the world and in life with your virtue. And some people might seem virtuous on the surface, but they're always like they're always down, or they're always in this like struggle, even though they might be kind of like, when you interact with them, nice or kind or friendly or funny, yada, yada. But you'll notice that people, like in a simpler terms, people will be like, oh, you're a combination of the 5 people that you're closest friends with. Well, you got to be aware, like if you're friends with people that are low success people, even if they seem cool or nice, they might be low morality people outside of what you can witness. And that has an energetic rub on you. So it's like the safest and best bet to surround yourself with or seek out and interact with people that are, I don't want to say high performance just in the terms of like workaholicism or whatever, but just as the wages of sin is death, in the sense that you do things that are not the way God and nature intended and your health suffers, the wages of virtue are success, life, health, and et cetera. So that's like, that's the metric for the direction you should go like in life. Kind of a ramble there, but what you're talking about really supports that theory of mine.
Yeah, that totally resonates, because everything is energy, and energy never lies. So, the energetic expression that people are putting out, it is creating an environment around them. And so you can see by, the outflow of their life, kind of what that energetic expression really is. So, so and that also brings me back to the point of when we begin to see that everything is energy and energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed, we begin to see how, the ultimate reality kind of flows in that direction, and that what we cultivate inwardly is going to become an outer expression in the world. And that's what we're going to have more of, what we're focusing on. And you said also earlier, and this is really an important point, nothing we do is ever hidden. And that particular realization for me was huge, and a huge catalyst in me in my own journey in coming into alignment. Because even if it's not some awful addiction or something, we all are out of alignment inwardly. And so the purpose of life is to awaken. All of life is designed to awaken us, to bring us into alignment. And so we're out of alignment. And we know that we are, we intuit it on a deep level, but we put on this persona or this mask and we go about our lives, because we want to present or show up in a certain kind of way. We want to be perceived in a certain kind of way. And, oftentimes there are things that we don't address. So maybe they're even unconscious. We're not even aware of them. That's what the shadow is. It's not bad. It's just unconscious. And so we have all of these things below the surface that kind of, drive us along, and we're not even aware that those things are even in the shadow. We don't know why we're doing what we do. It's like we're on autopilot. But ultimately, all of those things, just bring us full circle back into, into where we, what's going on inwardly. That, then it can never be hidden, because ultimately when we cross, the full light of clarity shines on all of that, everything we've ever done or thought, and really it's not about punishment, and it's not about bringing up every bad little deed that you ever did, because sin really is not so much the bad things we do. It's more being out of alignment interiorly. That's what sin really is. The bad things we do is just the fruit of that inner division. So once we come into alignment, sin kind of takes care of itself as far as the bad things we do. It's just about a non-dual way of seeing and being in the world. That's really what it is, to not be fragmented, to integrate everything into its rightful place, to be whole. Jesus said, be whole as your heavenly Father is whole. And unfortunately, that has been mistranslated in most of our English Bibles as be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. But the word, it really means whole. That's what it's about. It's just about integrity, inner alignment, being honest with yourself, taking a hard look. I think it was James Hollis that said the task of life is to look unflinchingly at oneself. And that really is what it's about, to be able to just face our inner junk with integrity. Because when we cross, we take whatever level of consciousness we have attained, we take that with us. And the full light of clarity shines. And so if you have been living in duplicity, if you have been lying to yourself and others, if you have been putting on this persona, and putting out this positive, well-polished mask in the world, when you cross, it will be particularly painful.
And you'll only be able to keep that mask looking polished for so long. I mean, you look at some people that are celebrity types, and they might have this all together, got it all thing going on, but the ways that they've sold out or behind the scenes been immoral, eventually, maybe they looked good when they're in their 40s and hitting their fame, but now they're 60 and they look like a goblin, or they're, they're doing all this plastic surgery and things of that nature. I can think of several. I won't name anybody in particular, but we've all seen it. I like to say that as we age, we get the face that we deserve. And in that sense, I kid you not, but like when I'm deciding if I'm bringing somebody on the podcast, I do like one of the first lines of intuitive, whether or not I'm going to have a good time with somebody or I want their energy on the show, is like, do they have light in their eyes? Or do they have a healthy demeanor? I get requests all the time of people that want to like talk about some kind of boogeyman story of like, something scary, they're doing it to us, and all that yada, 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 that has everything to do with just blaming the external for all their problems. And, then I look at their profile picture or their website or whatever, and they're like obese or just really saggy or, whatever. And I'm not saying that those people don't deserve love, but this is just something that we're taught, that we shouldn't have that kind of discrimination or discernment. But there's a reason why we have this intrinsic recognition of beauty and harmony. It is important, and sin requires no punishment. It is its own punishment. That's why the dogma of like, sin and punishment in hell and original sin that can just be solved by saying the right magic words in your head to Jesus, that doesn't really fly in terms of rectifying somebody's life in any means, but going on and on, I want to really talk a little bit more about the paranormal side of this, because it's so fascinating to have a insider like yourself. My friend Topher is really fond of saying location is frequency. And you brought that up in terms of like, darker places, poltergeist, haunting, stuff like that. But I wanted to know, in terms of your grandma interacting with you guys, is it just that one TV? Are there certain spots that have a stronger resonance for her, or in general? Like, did you learn about this at all?
Yeah, she could use any television in the house as long as it has a way for her to type words. She can use the laptops, she can use computers, she can use printers. In fact, we have invested in thermal heat printers because she was blowing through a lot of ink on the big printer. And so she uses printers a lot. She can send text, so could even use a cell phone, or she can make phone calls. So I have had my cell phone ring with her landline that she had for years, but it's no longer in service. But her landline number would show up on the caller ID. So I know that it's my grandmother. And when I answer, no one's there. And I hear nothing. And then the call just drops. But that she has told me that that's the indication. If she needs to talk to me, if she needs me to like come to the portal, come talk to her, she'll call me. So that's kind of like our little thing, a way for her to reach me.
This is like superhero stuff.
Yeah. But my aunt and a family who live in that house, they could also just pick up the phone and call me. Like if she needed to say something to me, she could just come on the television and be like, hey, call Brandy. And she has. So yeah, she's able to, manipulate she could move objects in the house and has, but I mean, it's nothing scary because it's my grandmother and she loves us and she wouldn't do anything frightening. And she wouldn't waste her energy just to do like parlor tricks. That's the thing too. It takes energy to do these things. And so if a spirit is expending their energy to bite and scratch you or to throw something at you, they are fueled with hate and anger. They're in malice. They are using their energy to harm you, to make you afraid. And so that should be, an indication that maybe you should not interact with, or it could be dangerous really to interact with spirits who are, angry like that, whether they're human spirits or some other entity. But yeah, with my grandmother, she could, there's not a particular place that gives her more energy than she would say, though, that places that are dark, like low vibration, places that are full of like low vibration people or whatever, that saps her energy. And so she wouldn't entertain that. She really wouldn't want to go to places like that. Like, and it would be possible for me to go places that it would be hard for her to see me. Okay, here's an example. Hospitals. They're loud is what my grandmother, that's the word she uses to describe hospitals from a spiritual perspective. She would use the word loud. And by loud, she means there's lots of spirits because there's lots of portals. Because when people cross in a hospital, some people don't make an easy transition and they have, they leave a portal. And some remain. I mean, they're like the earthbound spirits that I was mentioning earlier. They're kind of stuck there. They don't want to leave. Some linger in hopes of reconnecting with their family in like a physical capacity. Even they don't even even though that's not possible, that's why they remain. They can't let go and move on in their own journey because they're just completely identified with the world of form. And so it makes crossing a lot harder for them. But anyway, like if someone's in the hospital and I go to visit them and I want my grandmother to be with me or to be with them or help me to see, is this person okay, is very difficult because it takes a lot of energy to push through all of that loud and swirl of different energies. And some of them, maybe bad energy too. So that's kind of how that works. Everything is energy, like you were saying. And she has to navigate that on the other side. Whereas here in the physical realm, we navigate that, but we're not aware so much. I mean, it's entirely possible for a person to live their entire life not recognizing that everything is energy, although it is, and they're being influenced by it, but they're just not even aware that they are. I was having a conversation with my mom just earlier today about how from early childhood, I can remember having a certain, I don't know, it's like when you're in someone's presence, whether you feel an expansion or a contraction, like a constriction of energy. And so from my earliest memories, I can remember like being in certain places or around certain people and having that constriction. But then because of the culture, because of conditioning, you're told that, hey, when you get that constricted feeling around people, but then your environment's telling you the opposite, like, hey, these people are great. They're part of the group. They're part of our in-group. They're, they're family. They're people that we hang out with or whatever. And so it's like a conflict, between what your inner intuition is telling you versus what the outer world is kind of telling you, like you should be okay with this, or this is acceptable on some level. And I see now in my life that there are a lot of things that I have entertained throughout my life, thinking something was wrong with me, when in reality it was just bad energy. Like the energy doesn't lie, and and being someone who can really feel that. I was affected by it. And so Anyway, I said a lot, but everything is energy. And when we learn to pay attention to that, then we can follow our true path. You cannot be in integrity if you are disregarding your intuition, your inner knowing.
Super true. Like the greatest compass in life is in terms of what should I do? Who should I be around? Well, do you feel like you have more energy or less energy afterwards? And, being in love is like that too. I remember when my wife and I were first, when I was first courting her, wooing her, I didn't need as much sleep.
Yeah.
I had all this extra energy. I think she was going through the same thing. And then we have this new baby. Although our baby lets us have some sleep, which is very kind of her. I feel like I got more energy, even though I might not be getting quite as much hours on the clock rest. So there's a real thing there, a real compass there. And I feel like we maybe ought to devote more time to it. But we having 5 minutes left. I don't want to leave the free side of this conversation without letting you talk about your work with spiritual directing and Jungian coaching. And we can talk more deeply about that stuff in part 2, but man, I actually still have quite a few questions about the spirit stuff. So this is great. This is going really well, but please tell people how you can work with Brandy Anderson and what kind of things you might be able to expect.
So, my website is, like you said in the beginning, is brandyanderson.net. And so that's how to reach me. And I have information about the coaching and the spiritual direction on my website. I'm a spiritual director in that, and it's very Jungian based. Where I studied spiritual direction, it was heavily influenced by the work of Carl Jung. It's just, it's really, spiritual direction is just providing space for people to have their own realizations, because everything someone needs is already within them. They just need to tap into that. And so a spiritual director is just someone who comes alongside others in a way that helps them to navigate their own journey and to maybe ask questions to just help people dig a little deeper into what's going on below the surface. Jungian coaching is very similar. I mean, both of those things, the spiritual direction and the coaching, they go hand in hand, really. And where I would say a lot of coaching, a lot of spiritual coaching is about achieving goals or having a vision board and, achieving things. So people will come to a coach often because they feel blocked and they want to feel better and they want to accomplish some things and they want to, have tangible goals to work toward that they feel blocked in some way. And most coaches will help, work through those and set people on a path of achieving these things that they want in life. But Jungian coaching, which is what I do, is more geared toward not goal setting and achieving goals. It's more of going into the obstacle, which is counterintuitive, and learning, like, why do you have this obstacle? What is the root cause of this obstacle? And once you not get rid of the obstacle, but just integrate all of these different parts of yourself, and you bring to light all of this shadow material, you'll find that you will have satisfaction in all of life. So it's not about a particular goal or a particular, like, you'll go to a coach and you want to achieve this and then you achieve it and then you're done. Your work is done. But Jungian coaching is one of those things that really is something that you could do continually, perpetually, because the shadow material, there's always more, right? That's what I do. And anybody who would like to work with me can just contact me through my website, and we'll have a free consultation to see if we're a good fit for one another, because with this type of work, you want to make sure you're working with someone that resonates with you. And so, so that's pretty much all of the info is on my site, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I love that. There's a lot more value in going towards the hurdle than going around the hurdle. You're going to get disqualified from the race eventually if you keep dodging hurdles.
Right.
They're there for a good reason. I like to say that the obstacle is the course. If you're running a race, you do not go around the hurdles. They tell you where to go. They don't tell you to avoid them. They are literally the indicator of direction. And once you have that reframing, it doesn't mean there's not going to be challenge with it, but once you realize that, these obstacles are actually the guideposts of my direction, there's a whole new ability to access, well, what do I really want? What do I really want in life? Because when we're in that state of avoidance, we're disconnecting from the despised aspects of our psyche, the repressing, the things that our cultural programming tells us that must be feared and disowned, certain emotions, anger, hate, envy, vengeance, violence, and so on. It's not that we need to embrace and act out those emotions or stay in them, but to understand that the repression of those things also is the repression of their polarity that is on the positive side. And we can talk more about that. But yeah, that's one of the best ways to answer the question, what do I really want in life, is by looking at the things that we don't want so badly that we're in complete avoidance of, because they're actually a lot more connected than we realize.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. If wherever your deepest fear is, wherever your deepest desire is, that's where your deepest fear is also. That's where those blocks are, where that fear is. And so the gold is also in the shadow. So it's not that the shadow is bad or only these, bad things that we don't want. The gold is also in your shadow, the things that would draw you into your destiny. And so, yeah, it's just about seeing things without judgment, with a compassionate awareness, and just integrating everything into its rightful place.
Beautiful. Well, this has been a great first hour. I'm looking forward to going further in part 2. It's really nice to meet you so far. And thanks for being here. And I hope people go check out your website and your book. It's very well written. And we haven't even really touched the theological interpretations that are so useful, but we'll do our best to get there in part 2. Thanks, Brandy.
Yeah, thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation. It's great.
All right. It's that time again. We've made it to the end of the episode, and I got a few things to talk about as we wrap up here. First of all, I want to thank Brandy for asking to come on the show. I really enjoyed her book, and I found that the paranormal aspect of her experience and the, spirit communication, mediumship stuff that she describes, it fits all of the consistency to the various other reports that I think are authentic that I've come across in the 10 years of being intrigued by this stuff. So if you want more, go read her book. Although I think we pretty much covered off in greater detail the way that things are going in terms of talking to dead grandma through a TV than is actually in the book. The book has got more of a theological bent to it, with her personal investigation into scripture and challenging of the typical Christian dogma, which normally I wouldn't be all that into, because this is grounds for disagreement or even argument, especially online. But I like her take. There were a few things that when I came across in her book, I found like, okay, this gives me a solid encouragement to talk to her, and that I really wanted to. In particular, well, we'll just go over it, but I like the linguistic breakdowns that she gets into. That's totally up our alley around here. If you liked part 1 and you want to hear us continue waxing on about theology and spirit communication, and what the afterlife, other side, if it is another side, is really all about. Well, in part 2, we talked about hospitals as recruitment centers for Demon Corp. That's kind of my pet theory. The quickest way to get evil spirits to shift back to the light or the source, or just leave. The replacement of the idea of hell and eternal punishment with a more accurate understanding of the afterlife, purification by fire. The facing of everything that we've ever done, the life review, maybe you call it that. Not that it isn't painful sometimes, but it's not an eternal damnation. And the Bible doesn't really give you any reason to think that. That's more of a popular belief. We talked about the hermetic law of polarities or opposites, how to identify the false self persona in a Jungian sense. And then we talked about depth psychology, Jung being a pantheist, the concentric rings of indefinite mind emanating from the infinite one. I really liked talking about Kleos, the Greek idea of glory or fame as being the essential way towards immortality. We talked about how Jeffery Dhamer is doing in the afterlife, and the worldview shift to universal reconciliation instead of original sin and damnation. Lots of good stuff here. If you want to hear part 2, you go over to my Patreon, or you can get the channel membership on YouTube or access it through Rockfin. All of these are great ways to engage with support for the podcast and get lots of extra content. So I hope you do that, especially now that I'm almost 3 weeks into being a dad and it's going really well. Actually, all things considered, I think we have a pretty easy baby, but you know, the diaper stash is ever dwindling. So any kind of additional funding we can get towards that is really helpful. Not to mention that we got to eat too. So some of the stuff in her book that gave me a strong cue that I wanted to definitely cover off Brandy's topics was, first of all, when she took on the idea of Lucifer, which, by the way, in the Bible, there's like one verse about Lucifer, and it's just describing the son of the morning. She accurately describes that the entire mythos of Lucifer, as believed to be like the fallen angel, you know, most beautiful right-hand God, band leader of the other archangels, fallen out of jealousy or whatever, that there's nothing in the Bible about that at all. That is pure mythology. And I appreciate the way she looked at that from a linguistic lens. And then on the subject of hell, I learned a little bit that in the Bible, the word that is translated as hell is actually Ganon or Gehenan. Gay. It's referring to a place outside of Jerusalem, the valley of punishment or something like that. Basically, it's talking about a geographical location where the ancient Hebrews were doing their baby sacrifices to Moloch, you know, if that really happened. And that, you know, we're not talking about an actual lake of fire for eternal damnation. We're talking about a reference to basically the worst thing that anybody would have known about or could think of. And even the word punishment in the Greek is called kalasis, or that's the word for it, which could, you know, be interpreted to mean punishment or retribution, but it could also be a reference to pruning, as in purification, burning away the impure parts of the soul, and that's an essential and basically guaranteed aspect of the reconciliation that is promised to all of us as we leave our physical form. If we have the strength to let go of our egoic self and go into that light and return to the infinite, then we might have to go through a little bit of pain of realization and waking up to the truth of how our actions played out in the world and how it made people feel, how we really felt about it, even though it might have been repressed. And then the word metanoia is also one she covers in the book, that in the English translations of the Bible is given to mean repent, which, you know, that's not a horrible translation, but the word noia is like mind or thought, and meta is beyond. So when it says like repent in the English, it could be talking about, you know, transcend the polarities of your mind or change your thinking, change your understanding. That's much more powerful than just being sorry. Changing your mind will get you somewhere, but being sorry could even be an identification with that which you consider to be bad or evil, back to the original sin thing. So great conversation. Lots of fun stuff in part 2. I really like her accent, and, you know, maybe some of you guys will try out that Jungian archetype coaching and let me know how that is. Curious about it. Or we can dig into your biofield with a tuning session, and that's a great way to have some metanoia, change your mind, go beyond the mind. I've had some fascinating sessions lately, including one that was really cool, where I worked with a gentleman who was a twin, and getting the experience of seeing how sometimes twins can have this crazy like psychic overlap. That was really neato. So, oh yeah, I also want to congratulate the Dentons over at Tippecanoe Herbs. They had their second son. So the baby flood continues. The floodgates are open to new life. That's beautiful. And support them and support InnerVerse by going over to Tippecanoe Herbs, linked in the show notes, and trying that out with the InnerVerse coupon code to get 10% off. And I'm going to keep it brief. I'm out of here for today. I hope you guys are doing great and look forward to bringing back the Inner World podcast really soon with Dylan. So, you know, stay tuned to the channel. The best is yet to come. Much love to y'all. Bye-bye.